Hey guys, welcome back and thanks for tuning in. You're listening to the Colored In podcast. I am your host, Nai, that's NAI, because I'm neat and interesting. So today we're going to be tackling our third pillar, focusing on education. For those who may be new to the series or not familiar with our themes, let me be the first to welcome you to the crew. CREW, CREW, is an acronym for the four themes this podcast focuses on. It stands for career and culture, relationship, education, and wellness. If you want to know a bit more about the start of this podcast and the meaning behind these themes, be sure to check out season 1. And of course, do not forget to connect with us on Instagram, like our posts, share our episodes, and DM us your feedback at _colored_in. All right, so today we are diving into a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is budgeting. Now, I am a finance professional and I have been one for about 6 years, which may not seem like a lot of time, but I will say I do feel like I have enough experience and exposure to the topic to feel comfortable and confident enough to speak on it. With that being said, I'm not the only one having a chat with this topic today. No, crew. In fact, I'm going to be inviting a very good friend of mine who we're going to introduce a little bit later on. But she has had more experience with the world of financial literacy and is a bomb resource to have when starting on your financial wellness journey. So before we get into that, it's time for our usual disclaimer. This interview was conducted via Zoom because we are still in a pandemic, and I am taking the caution to preserve the safety of myself and my guests by social distancing and producing these episodes virtually. Great, now that that's out of the way, let's talk budgeting. So budgeting is a subsection in financial literacy, but to me, it's the starting point, the very foundation to financial freedom, generational wealth, building equity, and all that other good stuff. Why, you may ask? Because you need to know your spending patterns and decisions and where your money tends to go before you start making a whole lot extra of it. I mean, how are you supposed to build and have all these income streams and passive income that everyone hypes up without being able to track it and understand how to use it effectively? So that's why I wanted to start off this financial literacy series with budgeting. And before I invite my guest on, let me just give you guys a clear definition of what budgeting is. A budget is an estimation of revenue or income and expenses or costs over a specific period of time and is usually compiled and reevaluated on a periodic basis. Budgets can be made for a person, a group of people, a business, a government, or just about anything else that makes and spends money. To be successful, a budget must be well planned, flexible, realistic, and clearly communicated to yourself, not to anyone else. You can keep your budget to yourself. For anyone looking to get started, I jotted down some quick tips that I know that I used to create my current budget that I have right now. So first, you want to note your net income. And the first step to creating a budget is to identify the amount of money you have coming in. And that means the amount of money you have after taxes, not before, not invisible, not imaginary. You need to know the stream of income you have coming in on a bi-weekly, weekly, monthly basis after taxes. It's pretty clear and simple. Secondly, you would track your spending. So you have to begin by listing all your fixed expenses. Those are usually your regular monthly bills, such as the rent and the mortgage, utilities, and or car payments. Next, you would start by listing your variable expenses. Those you usually change month to month, like groceries, gas, entertainment, if you do bi-weekly spa treatments, if you do movie dates, if you do dinners with friends sporadically throughout the month, those would be your variable expenses. What's a good thing about these type of costs is that it's usually the area where you will find opportunities to cut back on any excessive spending. Next, my favorite piece, set your goals. So make a list of all the financial goals you want to accomplish in the short term and the long term. So our short-term goals should take no longer than a year to achieve. Long-term goals usually take years to reach, such as saving for retirement or saving for your child's education, saving down payment for a first home. Any of those things qualify as long-term goals. And remember, your goals do not have to be set in stone. This exercise is meant for you to identify your priorities before you start planning a budget or as you're planning a budget so that it can make it feel worthwhile. Next, after that, make a plan. So use the variable and fixed expenses you've compiled to help you get a sense of what you'll spend in the coming months. I recommend that you use at least 2 months worth of data in order for you to kind of predict the future on what you'll spend money on, and leave one-time purchases out. So if you bought gifts or you went out to celebrate a friend's birthday, those usually come far and few in between within the year. So if I would leave those kind of one-off expenses out, or I would add in a line item for one-time purchases and maybe give yourself a certain dollar amount to keep to. Okay, so once you have your plan, next step would be to adjust your habits if necessary. So once you've done all of this and you have what you need to complete your budget, having documented your income and spending, you can start to see where you have money left over or when you can cut back so that you have money to put towards your goals. And then last but certainly not least, keep checking in. It's so important that you review your budget on a regular basis to make sure that you are staying on track. I know that was quick, but I hope these quick tips are a good starting point in helping you create a budget. Now to the fun part of this episode. Let's switch over to the Zoom. So as noted, today we have an awesome guest joining us today, Ernica Sanin. Welcome, Ernica.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So Ernica is a mid-20s Haitian American Scripps College alumni with a degree in economics. She's a financial literacy enthusiast and educator who has taught financial literacy workshops since 2014 as an empowerment tool. She enjoys traveling, vegan restaurants, and aromatherapy. For anyone looking to connect, be sure to reach out to her on LinkedIn at eSanon. That's ESANON. All right, so our episode today is on budgeting, which you already know. And I just went through a whole spiel on budgeting and why it's important. So now I'm ready to turn this over to you. As a financial literacy enthusiast and teacher, and dare I say consultant, because you have absolutely helped me on my own financial wellness journey, I know you have plenty of knowledge and experience to share about budgeting. So tell me a little bit more about how you got started. How did you first start off budgeting and how has your budget evolved since then?
Hey, to start the story, we need to go back about a decade where I was still just a teenager in high school. And I've gotten so used to my spreadsheets that I sometimes forget that I actually started budgeting by accident. Was just a teenager in high school, hadn't had my first job or internship yet, but would get money from my parents every now and then, I think like most teenagers, and I would never know where it went. So here I am, this frustrated teenager, like, where the hell is my money going? So I started writing all of my purchases down and the money that was given to me in a book. And I think that's actually the first step to starting a budget, just tracking your expenses for a bit. At its most basic, it's just a date, how much you spent, what you spent it on, and how much you earned. I actually didn't realize that I was budgeting until I was at my after school program with a ton of receipts in my hand, adding them up for the day. And the director walked in and inquired about it. So I explained, I was like, oh yeah, like I'm tracking my expenses. He was like, oh, you're actually budgeting. Um, so I think that was like the first step in this enthusiastic career of mine. I think like right after I graduated high school, he offered me like a position for the summer to read this book on financial literacy and make a presentation on it for the current high school students. And so that started that pathway. I didn't start adding categories until a bit later, and it wasn't until college that my expenses completely changed, which I feel is true for most adults. I wasn't just a teenager living at home anymore. I had year-round part-time jobs and various expenses. So when I became comfortable with Excel, a few years later, I decided to digitize the process. Up until then, I was still using just a small notebook that I had. But because I had years of information on my spending habits and specific hobbies that I like to account for, and learn more advanced Excel formulas, my budget looks different, but at the core, it's still just a tracking method. it looks fancier now, and Excel just does all of my calculations. And there's more money to account for because we're not just teenagers anymore, we're adults with jobs. But at the core, it is just me wanting to know where the hell my money was going or is going.
All right, awesome. So, like you said, you have a lot more time cultivating this skill. And for some people, a budget can be a little daunting, it can be a little scary. So, you've already mentioned that your budget is a bit more complex, but what would you say an average person or a beginner should have in their budget? What are some key things that they should probably include? And what are some of the tools you would recommend that they use to manage it?
Yeah, it can definitely feel scary at first, especially when you realize just how much you're spending. But your budget is always meant to cater to your own needs. So my budget probably won't look like anyone else's budgets. I have different priorities and needs. And you can always choose to use budgeting sites and apps. Like I had tried Mint briefly, but I love my spreadsheet. I just set up the formulas at the beginning of each year. And on the days that I spend or earn money, it takes less than a few minutes to just add those transactions. I'm now using Google Sheets and have the Sheets app downloaded so I can just alter it on the go. So at the beginning of each year, I have a set amount that I calculate based on the amount I spent the previous year. And I have the usual categories that most people would have, like entertainment, housing/bills, food, health, personal, miscellaneous, transportation, and travel. And some people might not include these, but all of those budgets for me have subcategories. So for example, my food budget, I differentiate between groceries and restaurants. Of course, this is the method that works for me, but budgets are meant to be flexible and they're meant to cater to your needs. You might not care about the subcategories and you just want to track how much you spend on food overall, or you just may want to track how much you spend each month. It's been easier for me to estimate the amount that I spend on subcategories and to prioritize specific ones. So my budget for this year is also altered because of COVID-19. So it looks nothing now like it did on January 1st, and that's completely fine, right? So the amount that I want to spend for the year is still about the same. But for example, we can't go anywhere. um, so I did cut my travel budget in half and put that money towards other things like a new laptop and phone, because those were things that I hadn't budgeted for. I was like, oh, but we could use this year instead.
Right. So, yeah, girl, we are stuck. Okay. At this time that we are recording, it seemed like the first wave was kind of over, not necessarily over, but diminishing. So people were able to enjoy their summer a little bit, maybe take a little small flight to Mexico over here, a small flight to London over there. But now the second wave is hitting, countries are closing back up. New York is probably going to shut down very quickly or very, very soon in the near future. Whoever is listening to this or part of the crew, you guys are probably in lockdown or quarantine right now also. So we completely understand the sentiments of not being able to go anywhere. But I really liked how you said you tailored your budget to account for other things that you could spend money on. Um, and so that leads me to my next question related to financial freedom. So I read from like a general website. So, don't quote, well, actually, no, it's from CNN. So I say that their sources are pretty credible. But Americans on a whole are typically just not great savers, to the point where it's been recorded that almost 70% of us don't even have $1,000 in the bank. And I don't think they were counting kids. So, and on top of that, almost half of Americans claim that to cover a $400 emergency as part of like the emergency funds, they wouldn't even be able to do it. They would have to borrow money from somebody else or sell something quickly to round up the cash. And although a lot of people would point to the fact that the reason they have low savings or low savings is a result of like low income, that's definitely one part of the equation. But it actually turns out that it's really a reason for poor saving. And it's just a matter of poor money management, which is like failing to create or follow a budget. According to a recent study by the US Bank, actually, only 41% of Americans actually use a budget. And that's only a slight increase from a 2013 poll where it noted that 32% of Americans actually maintained and followed a budget. So a lot of people, for some reason, just aren't kind of clicking to this very important and I would say foundational skill to lead to financial freedom. I know that you're an advocate for financial freedom, generational wealth, financial literacy. So how would you say that budgeting can lead to that?
Yeah, and thank you for sharing those statistics. I've definitely read those articles, which was a bit shocking to me.
Yeah.
Um, but I always want to point out that when I speak about financial literacy, I always try my best not to sound or come off as elitist, because there are so many reasons why someone may not be focused on financial literacy. Um, so this message is for the people who have those goals and who want to work towards them, not to berate anyone who doesn't want to or just can't do so, because everyone's circumstances are different, right? There are so many factors that we have to account for.
Absolutely. Yep.
Um, but in terms of budgeting for me, I think knowing that it didn't have to be restrictive and instead it was helping me take control of my finances definitely helped. Like, you can't take control of your finances if you don't know what you're doing with your finances. So knowing how much I spend in a year helps me my budget, my savings rate, and investments, right? So of course, some experts recommend having at least 3 months worth of spending as emergency savings, which we know did not work out because, as we saw earlier, when right after the pandemic started, there were a lot of missed rent payments, etc. But usually, experts recommend minimum 3 months. So I personally have the equivalent of my yearly budget amount and about an additional 3 months, so 15 months worth of spending are accessible in cash through CDs and checking and savings account. And I basically just invest everything else. It's comforting to me to know that I'm still financially safe and I won't have to panic and sell stocks at a loss in the event of a recession or bear market, and I can just focus on investing long term. I think financial literacy is also an important tool to learn while you're still young, so you can use the financial system to your advantage. So a lot of the workshops that I've done have been with mainly high school students, sometimes a bit younger, and we'll do middle school students, but it's been mainly high school students. And for example, like, I've seen a lot of people associate overspending with credit cards and refuse to use one, but that doesn't have to be the case, right? So you can use your credit card as what it is, a tool. You can combine your credit with your budget, spend only the amount you've allocated for each month, pay it off in full, build your credit score, and earn bonuses and cash back all at the same time, right? So I've seen other people teach financial literacy where they're like, stay away from credit cards. And I'm like, no, we don't have to do that. Just learn to use it. It's a tool. We can do this. It also just leads the way to longer term goals, whether that's just paying off your loans, saving for your down payment for a house, or even the FIRE movement, which stands for financial independence, retire early. Or I've also worked with like helping high school students get into college, and my number rule for them is like, let's find a way for you to do so without getting loans. I think that's the biggest setback that we're facing right now, like as a millennial and Gen Z. So I think just getting them started on the right foot. It's like, okay, like, yeah, you can learn financial literacy, but let's also try to not start you off as a young adult with that. So there's a lot going on here. Um, but the overall message is that we don't necessarily have to follow the status quo. We don't have to give in to lifestyle inflation. We can go to college and find ways around that. We don't have to wait until 65 to retire, but some discipline and setting attentions will go a long way.
Amen. Y'all hear? Do y'all see why I put her on this podcast? Oh, Corona, nice. That cough was a little. Ooh. I'm just joking. I'm just joking, everyone. We are social distance.
Wow.
But do you guys see why I invited her on? So I think one of the three important things that you really just said that I really want to pull out and recap. First, don't be afraid of credit cards. This is not in any particular order, but first, don't be afraid of credit cards. So yeah, don't give your life away to debt, especially when it comes to going to school. There are a lot of funds, a lot of grants, a lot of quote unquote free money that is out there for students so that you can afford and get an amazing education without walking away with thousands of dollars in debt. So that
And
debt we
need
will.
blind colleges. A lot of colleges are need blind, the ones that are need blind. And if you have, like, if your grades are good enough and your ACT scores are good enough, apply for those schools. They will cover your expenses, they will cover your tuition. Like, let's get on this.
Seriously, like it's out there. Let's look for it. Let's find it. So yeah, like debt, no, namely is like the bad term, is the one that we shouldn't be afraid of. But I'm gonna say not all debt. There is some debt that we can turn around and use to work for us and be a positive thing for us. Um, Second thing, the status quo, as Ernica referenced earlier, is to have 3 months of your expenses saved up in a savings account in the case of an emergency, the famous emergency fund that people love to make sure you have. We've been in a pandemic that started in March, and it is now, at this time we're recording, November. So that's about 7 or 8 months in, 8 months into a pandemic where a lot of people are still very much unemployed, and this stimulus check or this pandemic relief fund doesn't seem like it's going to be hitting our checking accounts very soon, especially depending on the results of the election. So let's be very realistic that 3 months is probably too short of a time frame to have in your emergency savings. I'd say, based off of our current situation, let's have a year saved up. And let's set that as a financial goal for anyone who's starting to have a budget or wants to pivot or wants to make some changes to their existing budget. Push that emergency fund up to a year, because at this point, life is completely unpredictable and we have no idea where the state of the world is heading. Third and final thing, budgets are case by case and they are dynamic. Okay, my budget's not going to work for you, it's not going to work for Ernica's budget's not going to work for me, it's not going to work for you. There might be some similarities, there definitely will be overlap, but it's up to you, it's up to your spending, it's up to your priorities, it's up to what you like to do, what you like to have fun with. It's up to what you like to eat. Like, it's solely up to you. The thing that I loved about creating a budget once I first started doing is that it started to tell me a lot about myself that I did not know was a thing. Like, the lifestyle that I have right now, I think it's pretty normal and regular. It is a life of luxury, girl. Let me tell you that right now. I am living a life of luxury, a life of of having my wants. I call the wants that would the categories that would generally be classified as wants. They are needs to me, okay? But that's because I'm in a position and I have been budgeting for such a long time that I can sustain that type of lifestyle, which has been great and amazing. So that's what a budgeting can do when it comes to leading you to financial freedom. It's about creating something, allowing you to know yourself a little bit more, but then also sustainability, right? We don't do this for 2 months and then kick it to the curb. We definitely let this allow us to know where our money is going and why it's going there for the long term and for the future. So thank you for that, Ernica. All right, so our last but certainly not least question, and I know that this might be a funny one because I've definitely been a reason why may have happened to you, but any quick tips on staying disciplined? And if you'd like, please, would you share a moment where you have went over budget, and what you did and how you felt and what you did to bounce back?
For me, I do revisit my budget regularly, and I have some conditional formats on my spreadsheets. So basically, if I spend over a certain percentage, I'll make it so that the category title automatically turns red on my spreadsheet. And that's just a reminder to myself, like, hey, girl, slow down. You're doing a little bit too much. Relax. And I don't like to spend more money than planned, but life is unpredictable. And I keep in mind that emergencies will happen, like missing flights or cracking your phone screen. So we've all been there, or it may happen. Like, it's okay, guys.
That was me, by the way. I'm the reason why her phone screen cracked on my birthday. Just a quick little input there.
I'm blaming you. We have a new one. It's okay because we budgeted. We have savings. It's all good. It's all good. But you can always use the buddy system or ask a friend to hold you accountable to your budget. I've even seen people use the envelope method where they put specific amounts of cash each month. I personally don't do that. I think I do a very good job of like reminding myself of the amount that I have set. But there are a ton of different methods out there that you can use. But I think a moment that I was originally going to tell you guys about, like the flights and like my travel budget going overboard. But I think I found something else that most people might be able to relate to, especially if you're from a similar demographic as me, like a young 20-something-year-old living in New York. So there were definitely moments where I had to get over the fear of missing out and just stick to my budget instead. But at one point, I was just doing too much. So I was at a job with coworkers who like to do happy hour twice a week. I had different friend groups who all like to do brunch. And I was in three different vegan meetup groups who had a ton of outings to different restaurants around New York City. And it became clear to me very quickly that this wasn't sustainable long term. Right, so prior to this, if you guys are wondering why I separate my food budget into groceries versus restaurant, that was why. So prior to this, I had only had like an overall food budget, and I added the groceries versus restaurant subcategories when I started to go over my food budget, right? So if I'm like going to happy hour twice a week, I'm meeting all my different friend groups from brunch, I'm in 3 different vegan meetups, and they're all like, oh, let's go to this restaurant. And I'm like, oh yes, food, like vegan food, like I want to go. And I kind of had to stop myself and just create boundaries for myself and prioritize the interactions that were most meaningful to me. And excessive social outings aren't necessarily at the top of my priority list, and that's okay. It's like, yes, we'll do outings, but maybe I don't need to be like have 4 different like restaurant outings every week, right? So I think personally for me, I'd much rather put that money towards travel or concerts. There may be people who want to have a lot of social outings and they budget for that, right? So you can do the things you want, just budget for it. But I'm happy with happy hours like once every other week, and I don't need to attend like every single meetup. And I can also like see my friends outside of brunch or just do brunch less regularly. So it is like prioritizing what you want to do and like making sure that like you budgeted enough for that.
So, if we had to take anything away from that, it starts at the beginning. We need to see what we're prioritizing in terms of our financial goals. What do we want to do? Once we kind of figure out where that money is going, then we can create a budget and figure out a way to stay disciplined. So we've already mentioned this, but it's not meant to be restrictive. It's meant to be flexible, and it's supposed to encompass all the things that you do. So if you are going out 4 times a week for dinner, hopefully not in New York, but if you are doing it, add that to your budget, right? And have a line item for it and see how much you have been spending, and then kind of allocate what you need to it. And then maybe decrease it by $50 every month and see if you can stick to that. That way you can be a little bit more creative and meet the other financial goals in terms of being able to have an emergency fund or being able to invest. So so the budgeting process, every step that you take is not without the other, right? You can't isolate them. They all kind of flow into each other in order for you to create a budget that matches your lifestyle. And yeah, we're gonna have some mishappenings. We're gonna have some times where things hit the fan, and you're gonna have to deal with things that you don't expect. And I guess that can also be a part of the emergency fund if it has to be. But that's just life, right? A budget is not supposed to save you from like the craziness of life. If anything, it's supposed to help you feel more prepared for it. So like when you do have something crazy like missing a flight, you could think back, all right, I mean, I'm not happy about this, and it's going to suck that I'm going to have to pay for another flight or another seat or whatever the case is, but I can do it. Why? Because I have this budget that has allowed me this wiggle room to spend that extra money, although it's going to make us cry on the inside, because it certainly would make me cry on the inside if I have to get another flight.
Ooh, let's not talk about it.
Yeah, let's not talk about it.
I mean, we can, but
I don't want to bring back any PTSD for you. So that's our spiel on it. I hope we can encourage you to start on the journey of creating a budget and having and leading yourself to a place where you can be financially sound. For those who are already on this journey, I hope that you are able to take some of the things that we've mentioned and incorporate it into your own budget. I don't know, you tell me. But I absolutely want to thank Ernica for coming on as a guest. Like, you guys know, she was dropping gems the entire time for our time together, and it was really special being able to speak with you. So thank you again so much.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Alrighty, so that's it for today, crew. Thank you guys for listening, and be sure to share this episode with your friends so that they can join the crew. Connect with us on Instagram at _colored_in and give us your thoughts. And of course, you can find these episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Breaker, and Anchor. I'm excited to hear from you guys and can't wait to speak with you soon. Bye.